Hey there, you looking kinda cute. Don't forget to subscribe and check out my other socials for more. Enjoy. The summer of 1956 hung heavy over the small Midwestern town, cicadas droning in the thick, humid air. Riggs wiped sweat from his brow as he pedaled his bicycle down the quiet street, picket fences and manicured lawns passing in a blur. His heart raced, but not from the exertion of cycling in the sweltering heat. He slowed as he approached the tidy white house at the end of Maple Street. Madge's car wasn't in the driveway, right on schedule. Riggs had memorized her routine over the past few weeks, noting the predictable hours when the house stood empty. Stashing his bike behind a large hydrangea bush, Riggs crept around to the back door. His hands trembled slightly as he retrieved the spare key from its hiding spot under a terracotta pot. The lock turned with a soft click. Riggs slipped inside, shutting the door quietly behind him. He stood motionless for a moment, ears straining for any sign that he wasn't alone. But the house was silent save for the steady tick of the grandfather clock in the hall. Moving with practiced stealth, Riggs made his way upstairs to Madge's bedroom. Familiar excitement bubbled up inside him as he eased open the closet door. His fingers trailed reverently over the hanging garments, silk, taffeta, chiffon in a rainbow of hues. He selected a pale blue dress with a full skirt, carefully removing it from the hanger. The fabric whispered as Riggs shed his own clothes and stepped into the dress. He smoothed it over his slim frame, relishing the cool slide of satin against his skin. Turning to examine his reflection in the full-length mirror, Riggs couldn't suppress a small gasp of delight. The dress fit like it was made for him, nipping in at the waist before flaring dramatically over his hips. He twirled, watching the skirt billow out around him. Lost in the moment, Riggs didn't hear the car pulling into the driveway. He didn't register the sound of the front door opening or footsteps on the stairs. It wasn't until Madge's shocked voice rang out behind him that Riggs realized his terrible mistake. "Richard Montgomery Hawthorne, what on earth are you doing?" Riggs whirled around, his face draining of color as he took in Madge's thunderstruck expression. I can explain," he stammered, though he had no idea how he could possibly justify the situation. Madge's eyes roved over him, taking in every detail of her dress draped over Riggs's lanky frame. Her mouth opened and closed several times before she managed to speak again. "How long has this been going on?" Riggs hung his head, shame washing over him. "A few weeks," he admitted in a small voice. "I'm so sorry, Madge. I never meant... I'll leave right away." He moved to step out of the dress, but Madge's hand shot out to stop him. "Wait." Her tone was firm, but not angry. Riggs looked up, surprised to see curiosity rather than disgust in her eyes. "You've gone to all this trouble. We might as well do it properly." Riggs blinked in confusion. "What do you mean?" A slow smile spread across Madge's face. "Well, if you're going to wear my clothes, you ought to have the full experience. Sit down, dear. Let's see what we can do with your hair and makeup." Dazed, Riggs allowed Madge to guide him to the vanity. His mind reeled as she began brushing out his hair, chattering away as if this were the most normal thing in the world. "You know, I always wished I'd had a daughter to dress up," Madge mused as she pinned Riggs's hair into soft waves. "My Tommy was never interested in this sort of thing. But you have potential, Riggs." Riggs sat frozen, scarcely daring to breathe as Madge worked. Part of him wanted to flee, to escape this surreal scenario, but a larger part thrilled at the opportunity to fully embrace this secret desire. "There now," Madge said at last, setting down the brush. "Take a look." Riggs turned to the mirror, his breath catching in his throat. The person staring back at him was a stranger, and yet achingly familiar. Soft curls framed his face, while subtle makeup enhanced his features. Combined with the elegant dress, the effect was stunning. I don't know what to say," Riggs whispered. Madge squeezed his shoulder gently. "You don't have to say anything, dear, but I do think we need to have a talk about this. Why don't you come downstairs when you're ready? I'll put on some tea." She left Riggs alone then, closing the door softly behind her. For several long moments, Riggs simply stared at his reflection, scarcely able to believe this was really happening. Finally, he rose on unsteady legs. He smoothed the skirt of the dress, marveling at how natural it felt. Taking a deep breath, Riggs made his way downstairs to face whatever came next. Madge was waiting in the living room, a tea tray laid out on the coffee table. She patted the spot next to her on the sofa. "Come sit down, dear. Don't worry about the dress. It's washable." Riggs perched gingerly on the edge of the couch, hyper-aware of every rustle of fabric. Madge poured tea into delicate china cups, adding milk and sugar with practiced ease. "Now then," she said, handing Riggs a cup and saucer. "Why don't you tell me how all this started?" Riggs stared into the milky depths of his tea, gathering his courage. "I'm not really sure," he began hesitantly. I've always been fascinated by women's clothes, the textures, the colors, the way they move. I used to sneak peeks at my mother's fashion magazines when I was younger." He risked a glance at Madge, relieved to see her listening attentively without judgment. Emboldened, Riggs continued. "When I came to house sit for you last month, I couldn't resist trying on one of your dresses. It felt so right, like I was finally being true to myself. After that, I kept finding excuses to come over when you were out." Madge nodded thoughtfully. "I see. And how does wearing women's clothing make you feel?" Riggs considered the question carefully. "Free," he said at last. "Beautiful. Like I'm expressing a part of myself that I've always had to keep hidden." "I can understand that," Madge said softly. "We all have aspects of ourselves that society tells us to suppress. It takes courage to embrace who you truly are." Tears pricked at Riggs's eyes, overwhelmed by Madge's unexpected acceptance. "You're not disgusted by me?" Madge set down her teacup and took Riggs's hand. "Of course not, dear. I'll admit I was shocked at first, but I can see how happy this makes you. Who am I to judge?" Relief washed over Riggs, releasing tension he hadn't even realized he'd been carrying. "Thank you," he whispered. "I was so afraid of anyone finding out." "Well, your secret is safe with me," Madge assured him. "But Riggs, have you considered that this might be more than just enjoying women's fashion? Have you thought about whether you might be a woman yourself?" Riggs froze, the question striking a chord deep within him. I don't know," he admitted. "I've never let myself think about it that way." Madge squeezed his hand gently. "It's okay not to have all the answers right away. These things take time to figure out. But I want you to know that whatever you discover about yourself, I'm here to support you." Tears spilled down Riggs's cheeks then, smearing the carefully applied makeup. Madge simply handed him a handkerchief, allowing him a moment to collect himself. "What am I going to do?" Riggs asked when he could speak again. "I'm supposed to leave for college in a few weeks. I can't go back to pretending this isn't part of who I am." Madge was quiet for a moment, considering. What if you delayed college for a year?" she suggested carefully. "You could stay here, work at the hardware store like you'd planned, and in your free time we could explore this side of yourself further, help you figure out who you really are and what you want." Riggs's eyes widened. "You do that for me? Let me stay here?" "Of course, dear. Tom and I have plenty of room since the boys moved out, and I think this is important for you to work through before you go off to school." Riggs hardly dared to hope. "But what about your husband? What will people say?" Madge waved a hand dismissively. "Tom travels so much for work, he'll hardly notice. And as for the neighbors, well, we'll simply say you're taking a gap year to earn money for school. It's not uncommon these days." I don't know what to say," Riggs stammered. "This is more than I ever could have hoped for." Madge smiled warmly. "You don't have to decide right away. Think it over, talk to your parents, but know that the offer stands if you want it." Riggs nodded, his mind whirling with possibilities. For the first time, he allowed himself to imagine a future where he could be truly, authentically himself. "Now then," Madge said briskly, rising from the couch, "since you're all dressed up, why don't we go shopping? Every lady needs a wardrobe of her own." Riggs' eyes widened in panic. "But I can't go out like this. What if someone sees me?" Madge's eyes twinkled mischievously. "Who says we have to go out? I have catalogs galore, and there's always mail order. Come on, let's see what styles suit you best." As Madge led the way to her study, Riggs felt a weight lifting from his shoulders. For the first time in his life, he felt truly seen and accepted. Whatever the future held, he knew he wouldn't have to face it alone. The next few hours passed in a whirlwind of fashion magazines, fabric swatches, and lively debate over hemlines and necklines. Riggs found himself swept up in Madge's enthusiasm, marveling at her seemingly endless knowledge of style and fit. "Now, with your height, we'll want to focus on elongating silhouettes," Madge explained, flipping through a catalog.
A-line skirts, vertical stripes, that sort of thing. And jewel tones will look stunning with your coloring."
Riggs nodded along, trying to absorb it all.
"This is a lot," he admitted. "I never realized there was so much to consider."
Madge patted his hand sympathetically. "It can be overwhelming at first, but don't worry, we'll take it slow. Rome wasn't built in a day, and neither is a lady's wardrobe." As the afternoon wore on, Riggs found himself relaxing into this new dynamic with Madge. The initial shock and embarrassment faded, replaced by a sense of excitement and possibility. "You know," Madge mused as she jotted down measurements, "if you do decide to stay, we'll need to come up with a name for your feminine persona. Something to use when you're dressed like this?" Riggs considered this, testing out different names in his mind. "What about Regina?" he suggested hesitantly. "It's close enough to Riggs that it might feel natural." Madge beamed at him. "Regina, I like it. It suits you." She regarded him thoughtfully. "You know, I have a feeling Regina has been waiting a long time to make her debut." Riggs, or perhaps Regina, felt a thrill at hearing the name spoken aloud. "I think you might be right," she said softly. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the room, Madge glanced at the clock. "Goodness, is that the time? Tom will be home soon for dinner." She turned to Regina. "Will you stay? I'm sure he'd love to see you." Regina hesitated, panic fluttering in her chest. I don't know if I'm ready for anyone else to see me like this," she admitted. Madge nodded understandingly. "Of course, dear. There's no rush. Why don't you change back into your other clothes and I'll fix you a plate to take home?
We can meet again tomorrow to continue our planning."
Reluctantly, Regina made her way back upstairs to Madge's bedroom. She stood before the mirror, taking in her transformed appearance one last time. Part of her ached at the thought of removing the dress and makeup, of going back to being just Riggs. But as she carefully changed back into his own clothes, Riggs realized that something fundamental had shifted. He may not be wearing a dress anymore, but Regina was still there, just beneath the surface. And for the first time, he felt no shame in acknowledging her presence. Downstairs, Madge was waiting with a foil-wrapped plate and a small paper bag. "I packed up some dinner for you," she explained. "And I put a few things in here for you to experiment with at home. Just some makeup and accessories to start with." Riggs felt a lump form in his throat at her thoughtfulness. "Madge, I thank you for everything. I don't know how I can ever repay you." Madge pulled him into a warm hug. "You don't have to repay me, dear. Just promise me you'll be true to yourself, whatever that looks like." As Riggs pedaled home in the gathering twilight, his mind raced with possibilities. The future suddenly seemed wide open, full of potential he'd never dared to imagine before. He knew there would be challenges ahead, telling his parents, navigating societal expectations, figuring out exactly where he fit on the spectrum of gender and identity. But for the first time, Riggs felt equipped to face those challenges head-on. Because now he knew he wasn't alone. He had Madge in his corner, offering unwavering support and acceptance. And he had Regina, that long-buried part of himself finally given permission to emerge. Riggs smiled as he turned onto his street, the warm summer breeze ruffling his hair. Whatever tomorrow brought, he would face it as his authentic self, whether that meant Riggs, Regina, or some beautiful combination of the two. The next morning dawned bright and clear, sunlight streaming through Riggs's bedroom window. He blinked awake slowly, the events of the previous day flooding back in a rush. For a moment, he wondered if it had all been an elaborate dream. But the small paper bag on his nightstand was proof enough that yesterday had been very real. Riggs reached for it with trembling hands, carefully withdrawing the items Madge had sent home with him. There was a tube of lipstick in a soft rose shade, a compact of pressed powder, and a pair of clip-on earrings that sparkled in the morning light. Riggs ran his fingers over each item reverently, marveling at how such small things could hold such significance. A knock at his bedroom door startled him from his reverie.
"Riggs, are you awake, honey?"
His mother's voice drifted through the wood. "Breakfast is ready."
"Be right down, Mom,"
Riggs called back, hastily stowing the makeup in his dresser drawer. His heart raced as he made his way downstairs, wondering if his newfound secret was somehow visible on his face. But his parents greeted him as they always did, his father buried in the morning paper, his mother fussing over the bacon and eggs. Riggs slid into his usual seat at the table, accepting a glass of orange juice from his mother. "So, any big plans for the day?" she asked, settling into her own chair. Riggs shrugged, aiming for casual. "Thought I might head over to Madge's again. She mentioned needing some help with, sorting through some old clothes for donation." His mother beamed. "That's so thoughtful of you, dear. Madge is lucky to have such a helpful young man around." Riggs ducked his head, focusing intently on his scrambled eggs to hide the flush creeping up his neck. If only she knew the truth. After breakfast, Riggs pedaled over to Madge's house, anticipation building with each turn of the wheels. This time, there was no need for stealth or subterfuge. He rang the doorbell openly, smiling when Madge answered. "Good morning, dear," she greeted him warmly. Come in. I've got coffee brewing and plenty of ideas to discuss." Riggs followed her inside, marveling at how different it felt to be here in the light of day with permission. No more sneaking or guilty secrets, just the promise of self-discovery and acceptance. They settled in Madge's sunroom, surrounded by lush plants and dappled morning light. Madge poured coffee into delicate porcelain cups, adding cream and sugar to Riggs with practiced ease. "So," she said, settling back in her wicker chair, "have you given any more thought to my offer about staying here for the year?" Riggs nodded, cradling his coffee cup.
"I have, and I think I'd like to do it, if you're sure it won't be too much trouble."
Madge waved away his concerns. "Nonsense! It'll be a pleasure to have you here. We can fix up the guest room however you'd like. Perhaps even create a space for Regina to keep her things." The casual use of his feminine name sent a thrill through Riggs. It still felt surreal to hear it spoken aloud, to have this part of himself acknowledged so openly.
"I'll need to talk to my parents," he said. "Figure out how to explain it to them without telling them everything."
Madge nodded understandingly.
"Of course, we'll come up with a plausible story. In the meantime, why don't we focus on building up Regina's wardrobe? I've pulled some things I think might work for you to try on."
The rest of the morning passed in a flurry of fabric and fashion advice. Riggs, or rather Regina, tried on dress after dress, marveling at how each one made her feel. Madge offered gentle guidance on posture, movement, and styling. "Remember, it's not just about the clothes," Madge explained as she demonstrated how to walk in heels. "It's about embodying femininity in every aspect. The way you carry yourself, the softness of your gestures. It takes practice, but it will start to feel natural in time." Regina nodded, concentrating on placing one foot carefully in front of the other. She wobbled slightly, grabbing Madge's arm for support. "I don't know how women do this every day," she said with a rueful laugh. Madge chuckled. "Not all of us do, dear. There are plenty of ladies who prefer flats. But it's good to have options, and heels do wonderful things for your posture and legs." As lunchtime approached, Regina reluctantly changed back into Riggs's clothes. But the memory of how she'd felt in those dresses lingered. A secret warmth curled in her chest. "Same time tomorrow?" Madge asked as Riggs prepared to leave. "We can work on makeup application if you'd like." Riggs nodded eagerly.
"I'd love that. And thank you again, Madge, for everything."
Madge pulled him into a warm hug.
"You're so very welcome, dear. I'm just happy to help you become who you're meant to be."
As Riggs pedaled home, his mind whirled with plans and possibilities. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be difficult conversations, moments of doubt, and likely some painful realizations. But for the first time in his life, Riggs felt like he was moving in the right direction. With Madge's guidance and Regina's emerging confidence, he was finally on the path to becoming his true self, whatever form that might ultimately take. The summer passed in a blur of secret fittings, clandestine makeup lessons, and long talks with Madge about identity and self-discovery. Riggs found himself living a double life, dutiful son and hard-working young man by day, blossoming into Regina behind closed doors. As August drew to a close, the deadline for deciding about college loomed. Riggs knew he couldn't put off the conversation with his parents any longer. With Madge's help, he crafted a plausible explanation for wanting to take a gap year, a desire to save money, gain work experience, and clarify his academic goals. The discussion went better than he'd dared to hope. While his parents were initially disappointed, they ultimately supported his decision to delay college. Riggs felt a twinge of guilt at not telling them the whole truth, but he knew he wasn't ready for that conversation yet. One step at a time. With that hurdle cleared, Riggs threw himself fully into his dual existence. By day, he worked at the local hardware store, learning the business from the ground up. But evenings and weekends belonged to Regina. Madge proved to be an invaluable mentor and confidant. She guided Regina through the intricacies of fashion, makeup, and feminine etiquette with patience and humor. More importantly, she provided a safe space for Regina to explore her identity without judgment. As autumn painted the trees in shades of gold and crimson, Regina's confidence grew. She no longer wobbled in heels, could apply a perfect cat eyeliner, and had mastered the art of accessorizing. But the physical transformation was only part of the journey. The real growth happened in quieter moments, heart-to-heart talks with Madge about gender and identity, late-night journaling sessions where Regina poured out her hopes and fears, gradual shifts in how she viewed herself and her place in the world. One October afternoon, as Regina twirled in a new dress Madge had helped her alter, a realization struck her with sudden clarity. This wasn't just about clothes or makeup anymore. This was who she truly was. "Madge," she said, her voice trembling slightly, I think I might actually be a woman. Not just someone who likes wearing dresses, but
A woman! All the time!"
Madge's eyes welled with tears as she pulled Regina into a fierce hug. "Oh, my dear, I think I've known that for a while now. I'm so proud of you for recognizing it in yourself." They spent the rest of the day talking through what this revelation meant, the challenges Regina would face, the difficult conversations ahead, the process of transitioning. It was overwhelming and terrifying, but also deeply liberating. As Regina prepared to head home that evening, Madge pressed a small box into her hands. "I was saving this for Christmas," she explained, "but I think now is the right time." Regina opened the box to find a delicate silver locket nestled inside. She clicked it open to reveal 2 tiny photographs, one of Riggs and one of herself as Regina.
"To remind you that both parts of yourself are beautiful and worthy of love,"
Madge said softly. Regina's eyes filled with tears as she fastened the locket around her neck. It rested against her heart, a tangible reminder of how far she'd come and the journey still ahead. The months that followed were a whirlwind of change and growth. Regina began the process of coming out to close friends and family members, facing a mix of confusion, support, and, unfortunately, some rejection. But through it all, she had Madge by her side, offering unwavering support and sage advice. As winter melted into spring, Regina took her first tentative steps out into the world as her true self. There were awkward moments and painful encounters, but also instances of unexpected kindness and acceptance. Slowly but surely, she carved out a place for herself in the community. By the time summer rolled around again, the person who had arrived at Madge's doorstep in a borrowed dress was almost unrecognizable. Regina stood tall and confident, comfortable in her own skin in a way Riggs had never been. On a warm June evening, almost exactly a year after that fateful day of discovery, Regina and Madge sat on the porch swing, watching fireflies dance in the twilight. "I can't believe how much has changed," Regina mused, absently touching the locket that still hung around her neck. "A year ago, I was so lost and confused, and now—" Madge squeezed her hand gently. "And now you're exactly who you were always meant to be. I'm so proud of you, my dear." Regina leaned her head on Madge's shoulder, overcome with gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without you. You saw me, the real me, when I couldn't even see myself clearly." "You did all the hard work," Madge insisted. "I just provided a little nudge in the right direction." They sat in companionable silence for a while, listening to the chorus of cicadas and distant laughter from neighborhood children enjoying the long summer evening. "So," Madge said eventually, "have you given any more thought to your plans for the fall? Will you be heading off to college after all?" Regina nodded, a mix of excitement and nerves fluttering in her stomach. "I think so. I've applied to a few schools as Regina. It feels like the right time to start this new chapter of my life." Madge beamed at her. "I think that's wonderful. You've come so far this year. You're ready to take on the world." "I'm scared," Regina admitted, "but also excited. For the first time, I feel like I'm moving towards a future that's authentically mine." Madge pulled her into a warm hug. "That's all anyone can ask for, my dear. And remember, no matter where life takes you, you'll always have a home here." Thanks for watching. Don't forget to check out my other socials if you want more wonderful content, early access, behind the scenes, and more. All links down below.